Good morning, I'm Caleb Stone. I'm an agronomist with USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Cover the state of Oklahoma. We'll talk a little bit today about practices and things that producers can do to manage their operation, their cropland, in times of some drought stress and environmental stresses. Early June, we had a couple weeks where we got into almost flash drought conditions across much of Oklahoma and the southern Great Plains. We had high temperatures, high humidity, caught a little break there in the middle of June where we caught some beneficial rainfall. Now we're sitting at July 1st, and those conditions, we're hot, we're windy, been windy for now a week, and so those conditions are going to be creeping back in. Certainly coming into the June or July, August time frame where we're traditionally the driest part of the year. The biggest thing we can do in our cropland fields to mitigate environmental impacts is keeping that soil covered. If we can keep residue on the surface, that will mitigate our soil temperature in a couple ways, because our biggest impact in the southern Great Plains is sunlight and the heating of that soil. The residue will shelter that soil by reflecting some of that sunlight back instead of absorbing the heat. It'll shade it. We consistently see 20 to 30 degree higher temperatures, soil temperatures, in bare soil compared to soils that have residue on the top of them. When we start getting air temperatures of 100, 105 degrees, those soil temperatures on bare soil may end up being as high as 135, 140 degrees. All the moisture in that soil is being evaporated off to the sunlight. The biology is killed. Then when we do receive a little quarter of an inch of rain or something small, rather than it going into the soil profile and having those pathways into the soil, it's all evaporated back. So we've essentially wasted those small rainfall events that we get. Compared to something with residue on the surface, rainfall hits that residue, breaks the impact, it's got a pathway into the soil, and that most of that soil goes into the profile. The other thing that we may want to consider if we're not planting a summer crop or a cover crop is leave that residue intact where it's rooted in the soil. And this is very beneficial when we start getting high winds. Rather than that residue blowing off, it's now protecting the soil, not just from the sunlight, but now it's protecting it from blowing conditions. One of the questions we always get is producers plant a cover crop and they want to say the thought is that it uses moisture, and they're right. Cover crops do use some moisture, but we can manage that by when we terminate it. So if we took off some wheat, planted a double crop or a cover crop, a late summer cover crop, rather than letting that pump a lot of moisture out through evaporation, we can go in there and terminate that cover crop in the pre-boot stage, or maybe a little earlier than what we thought we would. So we still have the shading of the soil. We had a living root in the soil. It's protecting it from the wind, but we've stopped how much water it's pumping out. And a good, properly set no-till drill will cut right through that residue this fall when we go back to plant wheat. So not a big deal, but we can manage that. We have some producers that have used soil moisture sensors, and they've shown that cover crop will use about the same moisture as maybe bare soil, but when we do get those little bitty rainfalls that sometimes make or break us in the middle of the summer, that rainfall is much more beneficial than if it falls on bare soil. So cover crops aren't a big deal, just terminate them a little earlier. If we're growing a cash crop, hopefully we've planted a little narrower row spacing so that we shade everything out, shade the soil, get some better weed control that way. And then also, if we've planted a cover crop with the intent of using it as forage, either through grazing or baling, we just need to be careful that we're not grazing too much. We see it a lot of times. Producers want to graze it like wheat pasture. They want to take all they can because we're in a drought. Maybe pull some of the livestock off. Don't graze it as hard, because the grazing can be just as damaging as the tillage practices if we take it down to bare soil and a lot of bare spots. So those are a couple things we can do to manage a crop, or manage our cropland in these drought situations. And in all honesty, Mother Nature bats last. She's always going to have the last say. It doesn't matter if last year it was flooding, this year it's flash drought, possibly setting up to be a little bit of a drought. Keeping residue on the soil is going to be the biggest thing we can do to help mitigate that.